Hello and welcome to a new video. Today is very exciting because I want to share what I've been reading this spring so far. So, I have my notes on my phone. I have read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 books so far. I'm already half through 2 more, but that's for another video. So I have 12 books to discuss with you today. And when I say read, I mean I listen to the audiobooks. Just for your information, all these books I've listened to as an audiobook. None of them I have as a physical copy, so I will just insert cover pictures here whenever I talk about a book. This will be a very cozy video, so if you feel like it, grab yourself a cup of tea. I think this video will be a little bit longer. Let's get into the books. The books that I've read, I've selected based on one thing. What's going on with the lighting? Why am I glowing? Why is that? Please don't do that. Okay, so the books I've read this spring, I've selected based on one word, which is garden. I have found myself a niche genre that I really enjoyed this spring. I didn't know this was a thing. I'm not sure even if it really is a thing, but it is a thing for me now, and it is garden fiction. I really loved and craved and searched out books that were about gardens, set in gardens, about gardeners or garden clubs, garden anything. But it has to be fiction. Like, I didn't want to read actual non-fiction gardening books. Like, that's not what it is about. Garden fiction. So novels, short stories, that kind of vibe. So yeah, I started with what I think is a classic, apparently, which means it is an older book, and it is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I have no idea how to pronounce his name. I'm sorry if I butchered it. Please forgive me. So this book is about a little girl that becomes an orphan and moves from India to her uncle in England, Yorkshire, I think. It's been a while since I read it. So in the beginning, Mary is a very unlikable child. She is spoiled and has no interest in anything or anyone. And that slowly changes when she discovers a secret garden. Like, she hears about this secret garden that nobody has been to in 10 years, and then she finds a key to this garden, and shortly after she finds the entrance that has been overgrown, which is why nobody has entered this garden in a long time. And she discovers the entrance, she goes in there. The garden is completely overgrown since nobody cared for it in 10 years, and she starts to gain an interest into making this garden her space, to grow her own plants, to tidy everything up. And it's really beautiful to see the parallels of the garden coming back to life and this little girl who didn't have any interest in anyone and anything coming to life as well. She's really starting to bloom and growing into a real child. Like, she was a very cold child and she becomes someone who cares about others. She starts to make friendships with another gardener and to other children that she meets, and she starts to blossom into a normal, happy child. And the whole story is set in spring, so really the flowers in the garden comes back to life through spring together with Mary. And that's why I think it is really perfect for spring. So it's a beautiful story about friendships, hope, and coming to life. And it is set in spring, which is a bonus. So I've read this book because I've seen a lot of recommendations for it as a perfect spring book, so I wanted to give it a try, even though I didn't really expect to like it, but surprisingly I extremely enjoyed it. I was really into the vibes, and I understand why people recommend it for spring, because it is perfect for spring, and it's perfectly encapsulating everything that I want in a garden fiction novel, because there's a lot of gardening and spring. And a bonus is that it really made me want to go into my own garden and start gardening. Like when Mary requests or wishes for her own gardening equipment, I kind of was influenced by her. Like I searched up pretty gardening equipment on Amazon, and I thought about buying it and didn't do it though, because I do have gardening equipment. I don't need ones that are just pretty. While listening to it, I really wanted to go outside and enjoy the spring outside, just like Mary enjoys the spring in nature. And I actually planted lilies while listening to this, so this book gets a bonus for really making me want to go outside and garden. So I highly recommend it. The next book is called The Last Garden in England, and it is by Julia Kelly. And this is a story about 5 women across 3 different timelines that are all set in or around a garden. One storyline follows the Nisha Smith and is set in 1907, and she is a garden designer, and she's employed to design a pretty garden for Highbury House. That's the setting, Highbury House, and the garden around Highbury House. And it follows her as she designs the garden and falls in love with her employer's brother and the struggles that come with this. Kinda, you shouldn't start anything with relatives of your employer, that kind of stuff. That is her story. Then the second timeline, the story follows 3 women during World War I. Oh, I guess it's Second World War. It's 1944, so it's Second World War. Oops. The story in 1944 follows 3 women that live around the house. One is the cook in Highbury House, one is the lady who owns that Highbury House, and one is a land girl that comes to work there during the war. Like, she works on a farm close to Highbury House. And the third timeline is present day. I think it is 2022. But I'm not quite sure, it doesn't say here. And this storyline follows Emma, who is employed again by the people who now live at Highbury House to restore the garden that this famous garden designer, Nisha Smith, designed. And we follow her story and what she discovers about the garden designer. I don't think I'm explaining this very well. I think you should read the description of this book yourself. That explains it a lot better, but I tried. So now to my thoughts on this book. I quite enjoyed it. The stories were all connected through the garden and through this place, and the present day timeline learns about the history of the house, so we discover other things about the storylines from before through remaining letters and things that are found, and we follow Emma. We follow the present day main character as she discovers the story that we also learn about through the other storylines. And it was actually easy to follow the switches between timelines because we don't go through them chronologically, but we switch between them during the whole book. But it was still easy to follow because the stories were all connected in a way. And personally, I so far thought I was a fantasy girly only. I only read fantasy novels so far. I wasn't into historical fiction or anything like that. And surprisingly, I enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought, because it is not fantasy. There's no fantasy elements in that at all. And I still kind of loved it. So I was surprised, and it opened my eyes to a whole new world of different books that are not fantasy, so I'm excited where that leads me. I also found these individual storylines of the characters pretty interesting, except for one storyline of one of the girl who worked as a land girl. That storyline could have been omitted in my opinion. It didn't add much to the whole story. I didn't think her story was that interesting, but that's just me. Maybe others disagree. But yeah, I think her story was kind of boring and unnecessary. Sorry. But overall, it was a very enjoyable read, and I can recommend this book. Although it didn't have that much garden. It did have garden elements. There was mentions of the garden, and it is set around the garden, but there was not much gardening. So this book didn't make me want to go into my own garden as much. I don't know why that has become a criteria now. The next book is called The Twilight Garden, and it is by Sara Nisha Adams. And this is again a story about a community garden, and with multiple timelines. This time we only have 2 timelines, and it takes place in a garden between houses, and we follow the story of these neighbors that have to share this garden, and the friendships or relationships that form between the neighbors and the whole community. It is a really heartwarming story about community, friendship, prejudice, and change, and at some point it even made me tear up a little closer to the end. So I was emotionally invested in these characters to a certain extent, but maybe they just triggered that one thing that always makes me teary-eyed. But I quite enjoyed it. This was really warm, and it made me want to start my own community garden to share with others, to sit there and make garden parties and share memories, make memories together. To that extent, I really enjoyed this book as well. So that is another bonus point, because it again made me kind of want to work in the garden, to make my own community garden, to invite people in to have garden parties. Bonus point for that. The next story, the next book is called The Forgotten Garden, and it is by Sharon Gosling. You might have noticed that all these stories so far had garden in the title. As I mentioned before, that was kind of a criteria for what I wanted to read this spring. Garden fiction! So The Forgotten Garden is another story about a community garden, and it follows a young woman who got the chance to turn some unused land into a community garden to help the local community. The story is told from 3 different perspectives. One is Louisa, the woman who creates the garden, and who hasn't recovered from the trauma of losing her husband during their honeymoon a few years before this story takes place. The other perspective is Cass, who is a teacher and who also runs a gym to help troubled teens, and Harper, who is one of his prodigies. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. The story had some, at least for me, unexpected plot points. Like, I thought the story would go into a completely different direction than it went, and it was, at some points I was surprised at where the story was going, because I was expecting something different, and sometimes I also was annoyed by some choices that the characters made, but maybe that's a me problem. And also the ending wasn't really satisfying. It was a happy ending, but it was kind of it wasn't as romantic as I thought, especially because the title of the audiobook was The Forgotten Garden, Warm, Romantic, Enchanting, the new novel from the author of The Lighthouse Bookshop. And I didn't think this description is that fitting, because although it was kind of a warm story, it wasn't really that romantic, and I didn't feel like it was really enchanting either. So those descriptions didn't really fit for me. But overall, I didn't hate this book. It was okay, although it did not make me want to work on my garden. So no bonus points for that. The next book, I've already lost count of how many books I've already discussed, is The Hidden Letters by Lorna Cook. And this book was a bit of a catfish. I don't know if you can say it like that, but that's how it felt. Judging by the description, I was expecting something completely different, a very different story than what was there. So the description basically says there's a woman that falls in love with a garden architect who then needs to go to war. And they write each other letters until one point she doesn't receive any letters from him anymore, and she needs to find out what happened to him. So that was the description of the book. What do you expect by this description? I'm giving spoiler warnings now. So if you want to read this book, if you're interested in that, skip to this time code. Otherwise, I'm giving now small spoilers. So, in the story, the main character and her lover who went to war, they plan to meet up when he is on leave from war. They plan to meet up around Christmas, and he never shows up. In about 5 minutes of audiobook length, 5 minutes later, she finds out he's dead. I thought the whole book, the whole story was about her finding out what happened to him. So how can she find out what happened to him 5 minutes after she finds out that something did happen to him? And at that point, there were still 3 hours left of this book, and I was like, where's the whole she needs to find out what happened to him part if she finds out immediately? Like, that's what I think was a little catfish moment about this book. I was really thrown off by that, to be honest. I was really irritated. So yeah, she finds out immediately that he died in war, and the story continues for 3 hours to not be about her finding out what happens to him. And there also wasn't much garden in this book, like barely any gardening, barely anything garden themed in that book, even though the love interest, her lover, is a gardener or a garden architect. I wished for a little more garden. So the book overall probably wasn't bad. I was just expecting something very different, and I think that's why I kind of did not enjoy it as much. I could spoiler some more, but I will not. This book was a little irritating because of it not fitting the description. So wasn't my favorite this month. The next book is another catfish. It is The Welcome Home Gardening Club by Lori Wilde. And by the title contains gardening club. You would think the main focus point of the story would be a gardening club. Well, no, there is basically a gardening club. It just is not important at all. The description of the book says that the story is about a gardening club that tries to win a gardening competition, and our main character, or female main character, is appointed the one leading the project. Great, love me a good garden story. Let's read it. However, the book, maybe another spoiler warning, I don't really know if it is a spoiler, the book consisted of 5% garden and gardening club, another 5% of family drama, and some of the drama was out of this world. Like, the main character's husband dies from being struck by a lightning, like, what? And I thought some fantasy storylines are wild, but then just, here's some lore. Her husband died 6 months ago by being struck by lightning. Okay. Okay, let's just accept it like that, I guess. It was wild. And then the other 90% of this book are just the two main characters, the female and the male main characters, thirsting over each other the whole time. Whenever they meet, whenever they see each other, the only thing they're thinking about is how the other person is the sexiest person they've ever seen, how much they want to rip off their clothing and do things that I won't mention on YouTube now, but you get the gist. It was irritating after a while. It was annoying. Like, they had no other problems in life than just constantly thinking about how hot they find each other. There weren't many spicy scenes in the book, so don't get me wrong. It's really just them thirsting. They're thinking about it. They're finding each other irresistible, but not that much of them actually doing the thing. So this book probably was my least favorite of the bunch, because I was promised a story about a gardening club, and there wasn't much gardening clubbing in this book. And way too much thirst. The next book I want to discuss is not just a book, I crammed it together, like it is a series, a book series. And that is Daisies for Innocence, Nightshade for Warning, and Marygolds for Mellace. These 3 books by Cattrell. I hope I pronounced that right. And yeah, that's a cozy mystery book series. So far there are only 3 books. I hope there will be more in the future. And it is a cozy mystery series of a woman with a little perfume shop and an enchanted garden, which sounds like the perfect spring setup, and it was. I really enjoyed it. As per usual, the main character gets somehow involved in a murder case or multiple murder cases and has to solve them. And I thought these were really enjoyable in the setting. There was a lot of plants, a lot of garden, and this garden has some magic in it. Like, there are some supernatural things sprinkled in there. It isn't completely fantasy and over-the-top magical, but there are some magical elements sprinkled in, which I really enjoyed. And what I also liked, which is better in the physical books, but I wanted to mention it anyways. At the end of the book there are recipes, the one for cookies, because the main character's best friend bakes and brings cookies for the perfume shop every morning. So there at the end of the book there's always a little cookie recipe of that character, as well as a recipe for plant herbal things like soaps and salves and stuff like that. I don't know really how to describe that. It isn't really toiletries, is it? I don't know. But recipes for making stuff like that, and I think that's a really cute idea, so I wanted to highlight that. I enjoyed it that much that I'm tempted to also read the other cozy mystery series by the same author that is set in a bakery, which also sounds perfect to me because I love baking, but I'm afraid that it will make me want to bake more, and at the moment I should focus on gardening more than baking. But I have that on my to be read list as well because I really enjoyed this series. Then the next book is Old Herbaceous by Reginald Arkell. Again, I'm sorry if that's not how you pronounce it. This, I think, is also an older book. I don't know if it classifies as a classic. I'm not sure about that. And for that book I listened to the German audiobook because the English one wasn't available on the app, which is why I wanted to buy the book as a physical copy until I found that the German title of the book is different, and then I found, oh, I can listen to the audiobook just in German with a different name, but it is the same book, so I listened to the German audiobook. And what I really liked about the German audiobook was the narrator, because the way he told the story, the way he read it, reminded me of the German narrator of the Harry Potter books. They had a very similar style, so I was kind of in that feeling, I was in that nostalgic vibe, and I think that made me like the story a little bit more as well, because it was very comfortable and it was nostalgic. The style of narration, the way it was performed, basically. So this story is about a little orphan boy who picked wildflowers when he was young and then grows up to become the head gardener and the most esteemed flower show judge in the county. So it follows the entire life of this boy and then in the end old man. And it was a nice little shorter story about growing up, growing old, change and kindness. I think that was the main theme that was carried through the whole book. The only slight problem I had was that I couldn't really immerse in the story because the perspective of the narration changes quite a lot. It was a little hard to keep track of who tells the story at the moment. But that's just a small little critique that I have. And maybe you would feel different. Let me know if you read the book. Then we have another book. Another book with garden in the name. The Garden of Small Beginnings by Abby Waxman? I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Again, how many times am I going to say that in this video? You may have heard about this book. I heard from some people that they really liked this book. I heard from others that they didn't like it. I think it is a mixed bag, whether you like it or not. But I thought I'd give it a chance just because garden. It has garden in the title and it had garden in the description, so I had to read it. I am on the quest to read every book that has garden in the title. So this story follows a widowed mother of two who works as an illustrator and signs up for a weekly gardening club. No, not a gardening club, a gardening lesson? A gardening course, in order to prepare for her commission of illustrating for a series of horticultural books. The main problem I had with this book was that the main character at some points was a little annoying. In general, the dialogue sometimes was a little bit weird, like a little bit unnatural and over the top, which, yeah, you had to get into. And my camera is dying, so maybe I should try to get the battery running. Let's continue. Where was I? I'm almost done, I swear. Yeah, the main character at times could be a little annoying and the whole dialogue was a little unnatural at some points. Like you had to get used to the type of language that was used. It was a little over the top modern. I don't know how to really say it. It was a bit much sometimes, but it had lots of gardening. That's a bonus after the last few books that did not have that much gardening. I was really pleased with the amount of garden content that was in this book. And another thing that I really liked was the family dynamics. It was quite interesting. Like, as a mother of two children, who one was so little that she barely remembers her father, and her sister who's a little older who misses her father a lot, as well as the mother of the main character. They have an interesting relationship, so that was quite interesting. I really liked that. But what I didn't like that much was the romance, because it felt very sudden and kind of came out of nowhere. Like, I was a little bit, the last time they thought about that man, he was attractive, and in the next moment she says, yeah, go ahead and kiss my neck. Like, how did we get here? That escalated quickly. That was a little too fast for me. It didn't feel that relatable or natural to me. So that's a little minus point. And many of the characters, especially the other members of this gardening course, they get mentioned a lot, but they don't really get established. Like, a lot of the times I was completely lost as to who that character was that we're visiting now or we're talking to now. Like, which of these was this one particularly? I don't remember his little side story at all, or her little side story. I don't remember anything about them. I didn't even remember the names, and sometimes I got them mixed up, so that was a little difficult for me. But in the end the characters weren't even that important, so it didn't make a difference that I couldn't remember any of them really. So that's another little critique, that maybe those should have been established or described a little bit better or more distinct. Yeah. But overall, I think it is worth a read. It's a light-hearted and quick read, and I think nobody gets hurt by reading it. That sounds kind of mean. I don't mean it like that. Overall, I enjoyed this book. I just have some minor critiques about this. But once you get used to those, the story is quite enjoyable and there's a lot of gardening. We're already at the last book that I have on my list. That was quick, I want to say, but I think... Can I see how long I already recorded? Oh! 45 minutes! So it wasn't really quick. I guess this video is gonna get a little bit longer. Thank you for sticking around, I guess. So let's get to the last book. This is called Der Garten der Wünsche by Christina Valentin. So this is a German book. And I don't think it has an English translation, so if you don't speak German, I don't think this will be very interesting to you. Because you won't be able to read it. But I still wanted to include it because basically the title is The Garden of Wishes. Again, garden in the title, so I had to read it. And I wanted to include it because I really enjoyed this book, actually. This book is about a woman, Clara, who runs a guest house in a very small town, which is surrounded by a garden and nature that follows its own rules. Like, it does not follow the seasons, and it kind of has a mind on its own. So it has some little magical aspects in it again. And there are plans to build a huge hotel. So a big chunk of the nature is supposed to be cut up and covered with cement to build a huge hotel on top of that. And the main character's mission basically is to try to prevent that from happening, because it is her duty as the keeper of this guest house to protect this magical nature, and the whole village actually is there to protect this nature, so they're joining forces and trying to prevent that. But it's also about another woman. The other main character, Romy, goes through a tough time at the moment. She works at the library, and one day, after basically her husband broke up with her, like they split, and she's completely down, she still goes to work, and there she finds a book, or more a postcard inside of the book, where there's a picture of that guest house and a phone number. And very spontaneously, which is out of character apparently for this character, which is unusual for this character to do something this spontaneously, she decides to call that guest house and go there. The whole story of these characters is about magic of nature, and it is heightened in this especially magical place, and healing. The one character, the keeper of the guest house, is there to heal her guests, and one of the guests is the other main character who comes there and heals from the stress and the bad times, the bad things she's endured in the last few years, and over time she maybe also heals her relationship. It was a very cozy read. It gave me a lot of warm feelings. It was very nice. It was narrated in a very calming voice, so props to the German narrators. The only thing I didn't quite like was that the main character, Romy, some of her problems would have been so easy to fix if she just communicated. Like at some points when she, spoiler, when she talks with her husband and he explains why he's feeling disconnected to her and what their problems have done to him as well, she's just completely silent. She's thinking all this stuff and she's learning more about how he felt. She's realizing that she didn't notice that he was also suffering during that time they were trying to get pregnant. And she only focused on herself and she didn't realize that her partner was also struggling and he was also suffering. And she realizes that, but when he comes to visit her at the guest house and wants to talk about it and explain his feelings, she says nothing. She doesn't acknowledge that she learned this, that she realized this. She doesn't apologize for neglecting him, and their problems could have been maybe not completely fixed but mended a little bit quicker if she communicated better. So that was a little annoying, but I guess that's the point of the character. Maybe the story would have been a lot shorter if everything worked out that quickly. But yeah, that was a little frustrating. It was a shame. Why aren't you saying what you're thinking right now? Communicate, talk to your husband. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I picked it up. At the beginning I wasn't sure if I would like it, but then I really enjoyed it, and it was a rather long story. I think it was 13 hours of audiobook, but I really enjoyed it. I think I'd give it actually 5 stars. It was quite nice. Although it did not make me want to work in the garden, but it gave me appreciation for nature. Like, I listened to this book a lot when I was sick, and the only thing that I was able to do was going on walks. Like, this was all exercise that I was able to do, and maybe in combination with that it really helped lift my mood. Like, the book was talking about how nature can heal, and I was out there in nature and trying to recover from this terrible cold that I had. So that was just a perfect combination, I think. So that's it for spring so far. Spring isn't over, and I've started another 2 books. I've also started to read physical books again. I didn't have quite the time to sit down and read, so I mostly listen to audiobooks, but I'm really in the mood to try physical reading again. So I bought some books, but that's for another video. I think I'll end the video here. Leave your recommendations for more books that you think are perfect for spring, or that are about gardens, or are set in gardens, or are about gardeners or botanists or horticulturists, garden architects, like anything that has to do with plants and flowers and gardens. Leave the recommendations down below. I have quite a few more on my TBR, but maybe you still know some that I don't have on my list yet, and I'm really curious to hear about them. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe I've given you some inspiration, maybe you want to check out some of these books. I know I'm not that good at summarizing the contents of the book. So if you're curious about any of the books, please read the official descriptions. I don't know what the English word is. Klappentext, it is in German. What is it in English? The blurb. The blurb? If you're interested in any of these books, I recommend you reading the actual blurbs. I have trouble pronouncing that. I recommend you reading the actual blurbs of these books because they explain a lot better what it is about than I can do. I really condensed it down. I focused more on my opinions and whether I recommend it or not. But maybe I hope you found some books that you didn't know about so far and that you want to check out. Let me know if you're curious about any of these books. That would be really interesting. But yeah, give me your garden fiction recommendations, and also if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel for more book and cozy and garden content. See you in the next video. Bye bye.